Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
The new gospel that we've heard preached from Rome for far longer than most people care to admit is extraordinarily materialist in its orientation. It's aimed at making a better world. It's aimed at taking the gospel and kind of reducing the miracles to, well, materialist miracles. The miracle of sharing in the loaves and fishes. We've heard Pope Leo refer to it as the miracle of sharing. We heard Pope Francis do it and many others before them. One of the things that this new gospel can't abide by is reverence. And so to set the stage for talking about a bishop's green new gospel and Pope Leo's really weird message that he had the other day, I hinted at it yesterday. We're going to go in a little more detail today. I'm going to show you the quite frankly, I want to say unbelievable, but of course, at this time, we have seen many, many iterations of this at this point. We have a story here from Gloria TV that shows you that an entire country is about to lose their reverent masses altogether. So, headline from Gloria TV's EN News Service: the president of the Argentine bishops prohibits receiving communion kneeling. Now, somebody should tell that bishop that the Code of Canon Law says that the Catholic faithful may receive the Eucharist kneeling and on their tongue if they wish. But you see, the bishops are now the masters of the liturgy in their diocese, according to Traditionis Custodes, the letter that went with it to the bishops, and to the responses ad dubium and other statements the Vatican made in the aftermath of Traditionis Custodes. The bishops are the masters of the liturgy in their diocese, which means they can dictate the particulars about it, regardless of what canon law has to say. You have the right to receive the Eucharist kneeling and on the tongue. You do. But as we saw in the aftermath, during 2020 and its aftermath, the reception of the Eucharist on the tongue was practically prohibited everywhere out of fear of the so-called affliction that we all dealt with at that time. The same bishops who took our masses from us and allowed the sacraments to be declared essentially non-essential services were surprisingly quick to ban a practice they didn't like, that they found icky. Mass, or the Eucharist being received on the tongue, a practice Catholics had had since antiquity. Here's the president of the Argentine bishops' logic on this. So from the article, quote, on the 24th of August, a group of Catholic school students and their male teacher attended a Eucharist at the Basilica of St. Francis in Mendoza, Argentina. The Franciscan priest preached about an open church that embraces diversity. During Holy Communion, the priest repeatedly told the kneeling teacher to stand up. After 3 reminders, he received Holy Communion while standing. The same treatment was given to the teenage girls. One of them was even forced to grab Holy Communion with her hands. According to the Holy See's document, Redemptionis Sacramentum, no one can be denied communion for standing or kneeling. The male teacher reported the incident to Archbishop Marcelo Colombo of Mendoza, who was known for preaching an open church. In February, he supported the James Martin kind of march in his city. Accompanying these various inclinations of the flesh in tension with understanding and mercy, he said, is also president of the Argentine bishops. Archbishop Colombo responded to the teacher on the 1st of September, as reported on elwanderer.com. He referred to a decision made by the Argentine bishops in November 2002 that the faithful should stand for communion. By this resolution, in all diocesan celebrations in Argentina, the correct posture for receiving Holy Communion is standing, with the faithful having the option of receiving in the hand or on the tongue. Just over a month, 3 Argentine dioceses have denied Catholics to receive communion on their knees. That despite the fact that the Vatican's laws on this say you can receive the Eucharist kneeling if you wish. Doesn't matter. The bishop is the master of his own diocese when it comes to the liturgy. denying the real presence in the process. Because after all, if Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist, we would be on our knees before him. That is the critique you will get from many Protestants, correctly, by the way. They don't believe, many Protestants don't believe we believe in the real presence. Because if God were truly present in the Eucharist, they say, if we believed it, we would be on our knees before him. And these bishops clearly fail that basic test. Now, that's the same line of thinking that leads to this unfortunate story. This story comes to us from Australia under the headline from cathnews.com, an Australian Catholic news outlet, under the headline, Archbishop O'Regan calls for creation of ecosystem of care. An ecosystem of care. Yeah. So one of the most profoundly consequential documents ever released in the last 10 years was Laudato Si. We tend to rank it behind Traditionis Custodes and Amoris Laetitia and Fiducia Supplicans, but this document was the one on the care for our common home, all things green, all things about the environment. A document celebrated by the secular authorities. Awards were given by secular groups to Pope Francis for this. You had some really shady secular activist figures showing up at the Vatican, giving speeches about how great it was. All things that should have been red flags to Catholics, and were for many. The breaking point for many under Francis wasn't until Laudato Si, wasn't Laudato Si, but Amoris Laetitia. But now here we are 10 years later, documents still being invoked, and now you see this nonsense, the materialist gospel in full force. I mean, look at this first few words here. At a mass for the Feast of Creation. Feast of Creation? Point to me on the liturgical calendar where that is, please. At a mass for the Feast of Creation, Adelaide Archbishop Patrick O'Regan said it was time to recognize the beauty, fragility, and sacredness of the world entrusted to our care. The Mass, an initiative of our Adelaide Archdiocese's Council for Integral Ecology, was held at Adelaide Stockade Botanical Park on September 6th. Archbishop O'Regan referred to the algal bloom spreading across South Australia's coastal waters and said while it might at first seem part of the natural order, it was a sign of what Pope Leo XIV called the wounds of sin written into creation. Now, as an aside here, you will never catch me critiquing anything Francis or Leo said when it came to creation and to harm we were doing to the created world as a consequence of sin. Any environmental problem there that is caused by man is a consequence of sin. We are called to be stewards, to care for things so that future generations of human beings have what God has given us. But also not just because of that, but because how disrespectful is it to our Father in heaven to not care for what he has given to us, this masterpiece of creation? Well, think about it. If we are to honor our mother and father, that certainly applies to our Father in heaven. And if he gave us a magnificent creation, we don't have the right to just turn the place into a dump. That's basic logic. Whether it's because we must honor him or out of love for neighbor, generally speaking, we're supposed to care for things. But the problem you run into is Laudato Si, and the logic behind it is extraordinarily secular in its reasoning. Now let's go a bit to hear what he has to say. He said, when blooms grow unchecked, often fueled by pollution and warming seas, they suffocate marine life, disrupt ecosystems, and threaten the livelihoods of fishing communities, he said. What should be waters of life become waters of death. He said the algal bloom outbreak was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern. Rising temperatures, extreme weather, species loss, and fragile ecosystems pushed to the brink. These wounds are not evenly shared, Archbishop O'Regan said. And this is where he gets into the secular social justice stuff. Creation itself, entrusted to our care, becomes collateral damage in humanity's pursuit of short-term gain. And yet, amidst this sobering reality, the gospel calls us not to despair, but to sow seeds of hope. The algal bloom may seem like a story of destruction, but can also be a summons to responsibility. It invites us to ask, what small seeds can we plant today in our families, our parishes, our communities that will bear fruit tomorrow? Can we live with greater simplicity, reduce waste, care for our waterways, and support those who defend the land and sea? Archbishop O'Regan said small decisions such as choosing to smile, pray, recycle, walk instead of driving will not change the world overnight. Together, they form an ecosystem of care, grounded in fidelity and nourished by love. Like wildflowers breaking through the tarmac, they announce God's spirit is alive, renewing the face of the earth. End quote. Now, you want to really get to the crux of the problem. Preach against materialism, and which is not to say against capitalism, but just being obsessed with stuff, making that the sort of locus of your life, and instead foster sanctity, staying close to the sacraments, living a good Catholic life. The call to simplicity there may have been the best part there, because that is generally what we are called to in the context of our station in life. But instead, you got a lot of weird stuff there. And you'll hear a common theme right now, and that is that many of these figures like to pretend they are essentially experts on all things scientific. I'll give you another example here. This is where we get to the Pope. Go to WM Review, which we'll be using a bit for this piece here. Leo XIV invokes Tikkun Olam, a concept of our so-called elder brothers, Kabbalah. Let's break down what his cringeworthy reference to Tikkun Olam does and does not mean. Now, this was shared. I'll have a link to the full video of him saying this if you want on X. If you want to see it, it's almost 6 minutes long. That's why I'm not going to play for you the full thing. I did trim down to about a 3-minute video, which I'll show you in a second. What I cut out of it was mostly him talking about the wonders of the people working on ALS. That's fine. The context here is that he gave an address to the ALS Foundation, and they were going to be doing or the ALS Association. They were going to do a big walk for finding solutions to the problems they work with. Generally speaking, kind of a weird thing for a pope to do, but the weirdest part about it is just how much of that address was given to talking about the doctors and their research and all this stuff, which doesn't play well on a platform like this, but I'll have a link to the full thing if you want to see it. But here is what he had to say in a trimmed down version, because it's also not just Tikkun Olam he invokes.
Peace be with you all. Greetings from Rome. I'm very happy to join you in Chicago as the Les Turner ALS Foundation gathers us for the annual ALS Walk for Life. Ours is a gathering of many people. Let me say first of all that I'm filled with admiration and gratefulness to the researchers and scientists gathered here. Our Jewish brothers and sisters tell us that one of the great projects given the human family by God is to complete and perfect the very good creation given us, Tikkun Olam. My predecessor, Pope John Paul II, wrote, "If an artist cannot be stopped from using his creativity, neither should those who possess particular gifts for the advancement of science and technology be prevented from using their God-given talents for the service of others." Your care and compassion for those living with ALS and other motor neuron diseases are an inspiration to me and to all people. As our friends share in the Hadith, we are told that 70,000 angels are present when caretakers arrive in the morning. 70,000 other angels arrive in the evening. I believe that you too are angels. With devotion, knowledge, and skill, you care for our sisters and brothers with ALS, family, friends, and people who were once strangers. And in fact, your love has been purified by your service and then by your mourning. You have learned and are every day entering more deeply into the most profound of mysteries. Death is not the final word.
Having a bit of a problem here with the video, but I think you saw enough of it anyway. If I can just get this thing. There we are. We're having a storm rolling into my area right now. That's why the technical issue was there. But you heard enough, right? As one person in the comments talked about it, why aren't you talking about the salvation of souls? Humanism is an affront to God. Now, you can take this issue a few ways, the Tikkun Olam thing, a few ways. And some will go to what critics of the traditional movement would call the fringe aspect of things, involving, secretive plans by our so-called elder brothers. I'm not going to go there, mostly because that, I think, gives those groups way too much credit. But I'm going to go here to WM Review. I'm going to talk about the more concrete problem with this. So let's break down his cringeworthy references to that and what it does and does not mean. So here's what he has to say. When speaking to participants in Chicago's ALS Walk for Life, Leo XIV offered a warm greeting and words of gratitude for scientists, caregivers, and patients. But in the midst of his remarks, he made an extraordinary aside. Our elder brothers and sisters tell us of one of the great projects given to the human family by God is to complete and perfect the very good creation given us, Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is broadly described as, quote, any activity that improves the world, bringing it closer to the harmonious state for which it was created. And there's a footnote there, and if you would like to know what that is, the footnote, if you go down to the end, well, it was there at the end. I don't know what happened to it. This happens sometimes. It refers to repairing, perhaps more properly, improving the world through human activity. However, while it would probably be a mistake to treat Leo's passing reference of it too seriously, the term has darker and more troubling meanings than it may appear, which makes his invocation both scandalous and embarrassing. In recent decades, it has been bandied about in circles of our elder brothers, as well as outside of them, as a slogan for naturalistic social activism. Both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton have used the term as a means of establishing common good with American Jewish voters. The term is associated with spreading quote-unquote values such as this right to the sacrifice to Moloch, the women's ideology, the James Martin ideology, and green politics. Writing in the JNS, Dr. Sheila Nazarian explained that, quote, the term has skyrocketed in popularity today, particularly among the American Jewish left. In fact, it is so commonly used in liberal circles that it has become something of a punchline. Activists minded of these liberals treat it as a synonym for social justice, referring to acts of civic responsibility meant to repair the political and social ills of the world. This idea has come to refer to things like allyship, supporting marginalized communities, championing diverse voices, or simply just adopting progressive politics, all in the name of some alleged ancient commitment of our so-called elder brothers to fighting injustice and uplifting the oppressed. Some of them even interpret it as simply voting for the Democratic Party, end quote. Now, you may, if you're new and you're wondering why I call them our so-called elder brothers in the faith, it's because they hate that term. They hate it. And so out of respect to them on a basic dignity level, I will honor their opinion of that by saying so-called. At the same time, being critical of that group gets you pretty much nuked on this platform. But yeah, that's what that term has come to mean, voting for Democrats. Thanks, Pope. Given his political commitments, it would seem probable that Leo XIV understands the term either in this sense, or at least in a broader sense of good deeds having some power to repair the world. However, this represents the secularization of a term which originally had a religious meaning, which it continues to have for practicing members of that faith. We seem to be entering dark, dark times. Many have fallen silent under the previous, well, he calls it regime, and other worrying sides have appeared since his election. And I think all of that is accurate. So I'm not too worried necessarily if you go into the deeper sort of connotations. I am much more, in the grand scheme of things, worried about people who wear a religion as a mask for their political activism. I think those people do whatever faith they follow, do a grave disservice to just the very concept of religion itself. And they are able to dupe good, well-meaning people through the language they employ. But that is the weird statement from the Pope. And you would think that this would get some pushback. It's gotten hardly any coverage at all. But that's kind of a running theme these days. You may have noticed that not a lot of us anymore are talking about weird things happening in Rome. I guarantee you, if Pope Francis had given that same speech verbatim, you'd have 50 videos on it right now on this platform. Blog posts, Substack posts would be covering this. Major traditional aligned Catholic news outlets would be publishing articles on this, wondering, well, what is this? Invoking secular social justice terminology to create a better world, to repair a broken world. If you want to repair a broken world, because none of us disagrees, I don't think that the world is broken. This is a sin-steeped world, broken from grace. And the way to repair it is to repair the bond of society to God, and that would be through the widespread spread of the gospel, bringing souls to Christ. You bring enough people to Christ and you're going to transform the culture, transform society. It really is as simple and as complicated as that, because on paper, it sounds pretty simple to spread the gospel. But as we know, that is a much more complicated prospect than it sounds on paper. requires a lot of people wearing their faith on their sleeve and willing to talk to total strangers about it. Like, for instance, one of the reasons Catholics are celebrating Charlie Kirk in the aftermath of what happened to him is because he wore his faith on his sleeve. And I do wish more Catholics did too. That they'd be willing to talk to people who disagree with us as peacefully as we can, if the other side is willing to be peaceful in the discussion, and just naturally invoke faith the way he did. That's why it was so heartening to see Bishop Barron at his memorial. That's why it was, good to see some of the kind of borderline cardinals and bishops in the United States at the funeral, and why it was so fascinating to see 100 million people worldwide tuned into it. There is a hunger out there for the actual gospel. And invoking this secularist, materialist language doesn't scratch the itch. The only thing that scratches that itch is the gospel. And unfortunately, we, on paper anyway, non-Catholic public figures seem to be doing a better job of it than high-profile Catholic prelates. You have to ask yourself why that is. Thank you for the super chat, Brian Rory. It is appreciated. He says, Prevost is wearing the costume of a pope, whitewashed tomb filled with dead men's bones. You shall know them by their fruit. Well, the fruit so far hasn't been too good yet. Again, some people will continue to wait and see. I'm past that at this point, but I fully expect he'll do some things that will be, at least appear to be pretty good. But the track record so far hasn't been promising either, because his episcopal appointments speak for themselves, and most of them have been pretty bad. Now, I'm curious what people think of all of this. Elaine says, he has had time for this, but no time for the restoration of the traditional Mass. People are suffering due to the restrictions of this Holy Mass. Yes. That's true. He himself admitted he hadn't spent any time on the traditional Mass issue, which rather strongly implies that he and Cardinal Burke didn't speak about it, or that he just didn't remember the conversation he had with Cardinal Burke just 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was. Either is troubling. Mayrid says, Jesus commissioned the apostles saying, go and preach to all nations. Yes. Baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Yes. The Leo effect is like not picking on the weak-looking kid on the playground. So let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments. Please, I'm not trying to whip you up against Pope Leo or even some of the bishops we talked about. Pray for them. Salvation of souls is the first law of the church, including theirs and including ours. We may very well be judged on how we react and respond to this crisis in the church. So please pray for their salvation. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.